Hi there, welcome to the Healing Migraines Naturally podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Caesar, and I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor, former chronic migraine sufferer, and I've dedicated my life to helping other women with chronic migraines rediscover a migraine-free life. So welcome today. Today we're going to talk about genetics and migraines. This is a very common question. Are my migraines genetic? If this is your first time, welcome. If you're returning and you're enjoying the information here on the podcast, please subscribe. It really helps us quite a bit get the message out. One of the number one questions that people have is, why am I getting these migraines? When I went to my doctor, I thought that's the question we were going to answer. And so a lot of people either go into their primary care doctor or their neurologist, maybe even like a specialty center like the Cleveland Clinic or, a regional headache clinic with the question, why am I getting these migraines? And many people are told that they are getting migraines because genetics. Your grandfather had migraines, your mother has headaches, so your migraines are genetic. That's why you're getting migraines. This is something where people at first they go, okay, well, I guess that sounds reasonable, but then the more they think about it, they start to wonder if that's really the right answer. For me, I have migraines and headaches on both sides of my family. So my mom, when I was growing up, my mom had a headache every day. So by the kitchen sink, she had like her little bin of her headache pills. And so I remember as a kid, I would hear her clink the little bottle to take her over-the-counter medication. She took Excedrin every day for years and years and years. I never thought twice. When I was a kid, I thought everybody had headaches. I thought it was just like a normal part of life. My best friend growing up, I remember one time we were playing like a board game during the summer on our back deck, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to play this game. I have a headache. And she was like, a headache? What is that? What does a headache feel like? I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, you've never had a headache? And she was like, no, I've never had a headache. I was completely floored. I thought everybody had headaches. I thought it was normal for humans to have a headache. And so, I was probably, I don't know, maybe we were 13, 14 years old. I don't remember exactly how old we were when we had this conversation. But looking back, it's like, yeah, by that time, I would have headaches. I certainly wasn't having headaches every day, but I would have periodic headaches. And I thought it was just normal because every day I heard my mom clinking her little bottle of Excedrin and getting those little pills clinked out of there. My grandfather grew up in Berwyn, Illinois, kind of working class family. And his father, my great-grandfather, got such horrible migraines that he would pound his head against the wall in their home in Berwyn, Illinois, in an attempt to try to alleviate the pain. And that sounds crazy to somebody that's never had a migraine before, but I think a lot of us can relate to the horrible, horrible pounding pain and the desperation. And what if I just pound my head on the wall? It's like maybe that would feel better if I just created some external pain rather than the internal pain that I'm dealing with. Hi there. I want to jump in real quick and tell you about my client Beth. She was getting 15 to 20 migraines and headaches per month. And as you can imagine, this was impacting her work performance and her confidence. She also has 2 small children, and she was starting to feel like she was a horrible mom because she had nothing left for them at the end of the day. But she reached out and she booked a free consult call with me, and after I asked her about her migraines and her health history, I felt confident that I could help her. I help women uncover the root drivers of their migraines and follow a step-by-step plan to dramatically reduce the frequency by up to 90% without adding more medication or taking a bunch of supplements. So we built her personal migraine map, followed the plan, and now she will get 1 to 2 migraines per year, which she uses ibuprofen to treat if she needs to, versus up to 15 to 20 per month when we first started working together that weren't responding well to any medication. She just reached out to tell me that she got a promotion at work. She's on top of her career again and has been able to come off all of her migraine medication. But most importantly, she's a confident mom again, and she's attending birthday parties at Jump Zone with her kids and saying yes instead of saying maybe later. I've worked with women like Beth from all over the United States who were told, this is the best we can do, but they were still willing to dig deeper. So if you're serious about changing your migraine story, go to drlesliecaesar.com/apply or tap the link in the show notes, and on our free consult, we'll map out why your migraines keep coming back and the first 3 steps you can take over the next 30 days. I do cap new client spots each month, so if the calendar is full, the doors are closed for now. But if you're done feeling helpless and ready to do the work to heal, pause this episode for 30 seconds and book that consult call now. So my grandfather would talk about this a lot because ultimately his father's migraines got so bad that his doctor said, you've got to leave the city. You've got to go out into the country and get out of the city for a period of time. That's the only thing that is going to help your migraines. And so he had 6 kids. My grandfather was the oldest. And so they packed up and they moved to a homestead in Minnesota where my great-grandmother's brother was homesteading there. This was when my grandfather was sort of like late elementary, middle school age. According to him, apparently it did help his father's migraines. So, pretty significant family history for me on both sides. And again, I just kind of grew up taking it for granted that people had headaches. It never occurred to me that this was something that was unusual or a symptom or anything like that. Certainly I can look back and I could say, oh, well, it's my genetics, right, that gave me my migraines. And like I say, a lot of migraine sufferers are told by their doctors, well, the reason you have this is because of your genetics. Can look back on the medical literature. Now here in modern America, we think that medicine has only been around for 100 years or something like that, but that's not the case. I mean, we can read the writings of the ancient Greek doctors in Europe in the 1500s, the 1600s. They were writing they had what we would call a medical journal where doctors would write up case reports, share cases, talk about different treatments that they were using. In the West, we have hundreds of years of writings from physicians, and then certainly other cultures, notably the ancient Chinese, Ayurvedic medicine, which is the native medicine of India. These systems of medicine go back a long time as well, and we have documentation. So we have a long record of how physicians have looked at disease from multiple cultures. And certainly these ancient physicians, they were no dummies, okay? They were very, very good observers. And they certainly would observe that in this family, right, you can see these patterns. You can see that people in this family are predisposed to certain symptoms or certain diseases or certain health concerns. This isn't a real big shocker, even before we knew what a gene was, what DNA was. Humans, they were breeding plants, they were breeding animals, they had an understanding of heredity. And so certainly ancient physicians saw these patterns. Now we kind of think that nobody knew anything until some of our modern technology and laboratory sciences and so on, but that's not the case. Certainly there is a genetic predisposition to certain diseases or symptoms, right? So, diabetes, you can see that, there are some families where you have a lot of people who have gotten diabetes, right? Or high blood pressure, right? There's a lot of families where a lot of people in that family have hypertension. There's a lot of families where a lot of people in that family, they get migraines and headaches. And this is the critical piece that people are not being told. When someone is told that their migraines are genetic, this is basically a fancy way of saying you're unlucky. Okay, let's be honest. Basically, you've got migraines because you're unlucky. You've got these bad genes. We don't have symptoms because we're unlucky. So when our body is in a state of health, it doesn't generate symptoms. Symptoms are what the body does when it is adapting to less than optimal conditions. So we humans, we are highly adaptable organisms. Many things on the planet have to have a very particular environment in order for that organism to survive. There are some bacteria, they don't survive in an environment where there's oxygen. Plants, you can take a look at all the different plants on the planet. Plants are organisms that require pretty specific environments or they're not going to make it, they're not going to survive. Animals, again, animals have a certain environment that they will survive in, but maybe they're a little bit more flexible. Okay, but if you take a polar bear and you move them down to the equator, they're not going to survive for too long, right? They only survive in sort of artificial environments like zoos and so on, right, where we're putting in a lot of effort to keep them alive. But if you just take a polar bear and drop them to the equator, they're not gonna make it too long. But we humans, we can survive and thrive in a lot of different environments. We're highly adaptable. So we can live from the Arctic to the equator. We can live on top of a mountain. We can live at sea level. We can eat a wide variety of different types of foods, and we can flourish. But there are limits, okay? There are some limits, and when we are in an environment that is not optimal, our body adapts, makes some compromises, and it doesn't function as well as it has the potential to. And when that happens, it generates what we call symptoms, okay? And so there's a physical environment, and then there's a mental and emotional environment that we're in too. So even when I use the word environment, right, it's a pretty complex concept that we're talking about here. So all of that, our physical, mental, and emotional environment that we are in, our body is going to adapt to that environment. Thank goodness we don't just drop dead. If we're in a less than optimal environment, we will survive, but there will be some trade-offs. There will be some compromises. So the types of compromises that our body makes, there has to be some sort of genetic predisposition to that. That's very clear. So one person in environment A that's not too optimal, they're going to get diabetes. And another person in that same environment that isn't optimal, they're going to get migraines. And you're going to see that family history. So what I like to say is that we're genetically prone to certain symptoms or certain conditions or certain diseases. But first, we have to sort of not be in a state of health, okay? The environment, the physical, mental, and emotional environment that we find ourselves in has to be far enough out of alignment from our good flourishing that our body has to make enough adaptations and compromises to survive in that less than optimal or less than ideal environment. And those compromises are going to come in the form of symptoms, and the type of symptoms that we're prone to, there's a genetic component to that. So this is what we want to focus on, because we can't change our genetics. Our genetics are determined at the moment of conception. Can't change them. But we can change the environment. This is where we do have some agency and some control over, and that's what we should be focusing on. So when people go into the doctor looking for the answer to the question, why am I getting these migraines? Instead of just telling people, well, you're unlucky, you got these genes, what do you expect? You've got this family history. We should be encouraging people to identify, okay, aspects of the environment are not optimal for my best flourishing, and where can I exercise some control to make some changes? We can't completely change the environment that we're in. My grandfather, his parents, this is how desperate my great-grandfather must have been. And, his poor wife, right? Because I know that this impacted his ability to work. My grandfather would also talk about that. So, you've got a wife, you've got 6 kids, and then to pack up and change the environment, right, and go up to a homestead in rural Minnesota. This was a radical change in the environment that they made, and I'm sure that it came at quite a cost. This was an environment change recommendation that I'm sure through great sacrifice they made and they were able to do, and apparently that helped him. But what I have found in my work, if someone is susceptible, say, to weather-related migraines, we don't actually have to pack up and move somewhere where there's no weather, which is pretty hard to do because everywhere on the planet there's weather, right? But a lot of people think, well, maybe I'll move to Phoenix or something because they don't have as many storms and so on. But, there is some weather in Phoenix. I lived there for 9 years. There is weather in Phoenix, and people do get migraines in Phoenix. We don't have to make these types of drastic changes to our environment. So we want to identify what aspects of the environment that we're in, they're less than optimal enough that they're undermining our health. We are very adaptable. We can flourish in a lot of environments, but there are limits. And so part of the healing process, and when I work with my clients, part of this process is to identify, okay, what is in the environment here, physical, mental, and emotional environment, that is far enough out of alignment from what is optimal, that it's undermining our health. And then once we've identified those things, or at least, we may not know for certain out of the gate that this is causing an issue, but we've got some leads, right? We've got some leads, and we're going to run down some leads and investigate things. And then, okay, what are some doable changes you could make that's going to bring the environment back into better alignment for your body to flourish in that environment? And that's what we should be focusing on. But we're not focusing on that, right? We're just telling everybody that it's genetic, you're doomed, you're unlucky, you got bad genes, and so here's some more medication for you. And this is not what people want. Nobody wants to take medication. I know if you're taking medication right now, you're taking it because you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Between having to function and taking care of the things and the people that you need to take care of. And that's a tough place to be in. I've been in that spot myself. Hi there. I want to jump in real quick and tell you about my client, Beth. She was getting 15 to 20 migraines and headaches per month. And as you can imagine, this was impacting her work performance and her confidence. She also has 2 small children, and she was starting to feel like she was a horrible mom because she had nothing left for them at the end of the day. But she reached out and she booked a free consult call with me, and after I asked her about her migraines and her health history, I felt confident that I could help her. I help women uncover the root drivers of their migraines and follow a step-by-step plan to dramatically reduce the frequency by up to 90% without adding more medication or taking a bunch of supplements. So we built her personal migraine map, followed the plan, and now she will get 1 to 2 migraines per year, which she uses ibuprofen to treat if she needs to, versus up to 15 to 20 per month when we first started working together that weren't responding well to any medication. She just reached out to tell me that she got a promotion at work, she's on top of her career again, and has been able to come off all of her migraine medication. But most importantly, she's a confident mom again, and she's attending birthday parties at Jump Zone with her kids and saying yes instead of saying maybe later. I've worked with women like Beth from all over the United States who were told, this is the best we can do, but they were still willing to dig deeper. So if you're serious about changing your migraine story, go to drlesliecaesar.com/apply or tap the link in the show notes, and on our free consult, we'll map out why your migraines keep coming back and the first 3 steps you can take over the next 30 days. I do cap new client spots each month, so if the calendar is full, the doors are closed for now. But if you're done feeling helpless and ready to do the work to heal, pause this episode for 30 seconds and book that consult call now. I know that intuitively, particularly if you're listening to this podcast, if I just knew what steps to take, I think I would feel better. I think my body would respond to that. So that's really what we should be focusing on. It's great that we have the technology that we have today. Certainly, when people are, at a 10 out of 10, thank goodness that we do have some medication that can help people. So with the information that we have now about genetics, and there's a lot that we don't know yet. There's a lot of discoveries yet to be made. But, when they developed the technology to actually sequence the genome of different organisms, this was very exciting. So at first, they started sequencing the genome, simple organisms, right? Then in the early 90s, they started the Human Genome Project. And this was to, sort of crack the genetic code. We're going to sequence the human genome. And because they had already done some complete sequences on less complex animals, I can use like an earthworm as an example. Okay, so they had sequenced all of the genes of an earthworm, and so we are a lot more complex than an earthworm, and so it was anticipated that we would have, orders of magnitude more genes than an earthworm. Okay, so they were like expecting this Human Genome Project to take a long time because, based on how long it took us to do an earthworm, we're going to, doing a human is going to be, 4, 5, 6 times, 10 times of that amount. And lo and behold, we really don't have that many more genes than an earthworm. In fact, there's a lot of different species of worms, but we have about the same number of genes that a worm has. So this was a real shock to the researchers, right? Because they're thinking this is, we must have this, huge genome, and really we don't have that many more genes than a simple earthworm. So then they had to go into, okay, so what's actually going on here? And the field of epigenetics, I believe it was the field of epigenetics was in place before the human genome, but it really became critical to understand what's called epigenetics when they realized that we don't have that many genes. So how do you have this really complex organism not have that many genes? And the answer is what's called epigenetics. So what they have determined is that depending on the environment that the organism is in, certain genes will turn on and certain genes will turn off. And our genes are sort of like the recipe book for our cells. So our cells constantly have to do their work, produce hormones, they have to produce proteins, they have to produce signaling molecules, right? Our cells are constantly making stuff. So the recipe book for what they make is our genes. So epigenetics refers to the phenomenon where certain genes will turn on and turn off depending on the environment. So it's sort of like we have this recipe book, and depending on the environment, certain recipes are going to get ripped out of the book and certain recipes are going to be put back into the book. And so that is the physical mechanism behind how our body adapts to different environments. Physical environment, mental and emotional environment. Our emotions can turn genes on and off. This is where, right, our environment, it's not changing your genetics, but it's turning different genes on and off. And if the gene is off, that's going to change the recipe book. If the gene is on, that's going to change the recipe book. And so that's sort of how it's believed that our bodies execute this adapting to the environment. So, and there is no migraine gene, okay? This is the other thing that, they were hoping that when they did the human genome mapping or project, that they were going to discover, like, here's the gene for migraines, here's the gene for epilepsy, here's the gene for diabetes. But that's not the case, right? Diabetes comes about because of all of the different on and off genes, right? These genes are on and these genes are off, and the particular combination of those on-off patterns, that is what produces ultimately the thing that we call diabetes or migraines or high blood pressure, right? So it's not so simple that there's just like this one little on and off switch, and once that gets flipped, now you're doomed. It's the combination of all of these different on and off switches and how your body expresses that is ultimately going to lead to the symptoms that you experience. So with all of this complexity it really comes down, when you're dealing with a complex system, and we humans, we are extraordinarily complex systems. You're never going to get anywhere if you try to find like that one specific on-off switch, the one specific gene, the one specific thing that's causing it, because it's never one specific thing when you're dealing with a complex system. And when you go into a complex system and you try to make a change, you have downstream consequences that you're not going to be able to understand, predict, mitigate ahead of time. When you're dealing with complex systems, you have to go down to fundamentals. You have to go down to first principles and intervene in a different way. With modern medicine and with pharmaceuticals, we're trying to manipulate a very complex system. And at first it seems like it's working until, it's no longer working. You want to go down to first principles, to fundamentals. And this is what I call the 3 principles. So how do we flourish in the environment that we find ourselves in? What are the first principles? What are the fundamentals of what our body needs to maintain its state of health, even within the very diverse environments that we humans find ourselves in? So these 3 principles are as follows. Number 1, we have to get the nutrients that our cells need to the cells. Our cells don't function on frappuccinos and unicorn dust. Everything that our cells do requires nutrients to get that work done, right? So if you're thinking of a factory, in order for that factory to produce goods, you have to have the raw materials coming into the factory. If the raw materials are held up, if the train doesn't deliver the raw materials to the factory is not going to be able to produce the goods. So the first principle, the first thing that our body needs is it needs the nutrients required to function optimally. The second principle is we have to remove metabolic waste material and other toxins from the cells and ultimately from our body. So again, at the end of the day, and the factory's done all of this stuff and all the goods have been made, there's going to be a lot of trash that's produced. And you can't just leave all that trash laying around on the factory floor. You got to come in every night and you got to clean up, right? Because the next morning, things are not going to go too well on the assembly line if there's all this trash laying around from the day before. So we've got to take the trash out, okay? We've got to get that out of the cells and ultimately out of our body. And the third principle is we have to restore our resiliency and vitality so that we can weather the inevitable stressors that are bombarding us all the time. We are continuously being bombarded by stressors. In the migraine world, we sometimes call these things triggers. So the sunlight, the barometric pressure changes, the MSG in the food that we ate at a restaurant. All of these physical stressors that are hitting our body, these are relatively small physical stressors, but if you're prone to migraines, you can really feel them. Larger physical stressors would be something like an injury, an accident, a surgery, major illness like a bronchitis or a bad flu, something like that. And then we have things that we call stress, like mental and emotional stress. Those stressors are sort of knocking us out of homeostasis, out of balance, out of health. We have to have enough resiliency and vitality to stay in balance, to stay in homeostasis, to kind of stay upright in the face of all of these stressors. So we have to restore that resiliency and vitality. Otherwise, we're going to be just sort of at the whim of all of these little stressors, or what we typically call triggers in the migraine world. So those 3 things are where we want to intervene. Instead of trying to, manipulate this very complex system, we actually want to first take a look at, okay, what's missing here within these 3 principles, and then how do we want to address those deficiencies or those missing pieces or those blockers. And then when we do that, basically I call that giving your body what it needs to function optimally. The body will take that sort of raw material and then do with it what is going to be the best thing for us in the particular environment that we're in. So that's what we should focus on instead of our genetics that we have no control over. And again, it's not like there's a migraine gene. There isn't a gene for the vast majority of different health concerns. Like, this is the gene, that causes migraines. It's just not the case. It's much more complex than that. But the good news is that because it's not just one gene that predisposes us to things, it's not a death sentence. How am I sitting here in front of you today with the type of family history that I have, and I haven't had a migraine in a very long time? So how is that possible? If it was because of my genetics, that wouldn't be possible. But I'm sitting here today because I now know what my body needs in order for it to adapt to the environment that I'm in. I'm a fifth generation Chicagoan. So in that, Chicago environment, one man had horrible migraines where he's banging his head against his wall. And now, over 100 years later, his great granddaughter is not banging her head against a wall with migraines, right? It's helping other women recover from migraines too, right? So I hope that this gives you a lot of hope. So just because you have a family history of migraines, you're not doomed. You don't have defective genes. What we want to do is we want to identify, what does your body need to flourish in the environment that it's in. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. Again, if you did, please give us a like and a subscribe on your way out here. And if this resonates with you, I would love to talk with you further on a free consult call. So if you'd like to get on my calendar and talk with me about your migraines and talk about getting a game plan together to get you feeling better, go ahead and click on the link in the description, and I would love to talk with you. So have a great day, everybody. I will talk to you guys soon.